The 1800s in America, a cold and stormy day at the shores of Cape Cod. The winds were so fierce that the trees seemed to be fighting for their roots, and the waves of the ocean collided violently, roaring in anger. Yet, the crowd gathered on the shore wasn't staring at the storm, they were fixated on something far more astonishing and terrifying. A massive whale had become stranded on the sand, and with every heavy breath, its immense voice echoed across the entire coastline. This was no ordinary whale. Over 50 feet in length, its eyes reflected a haunting helplessness that shook the hearts of everyone who looked upon it. Fear gripped some, awe captivated others. Some whispered, "Leave it. It could harm us," while in the eyes of a few, a spark of hope and determination glimmered. Among the crowd were a few young fishermen whose hearts burned with courage and compassion. They could not ignore this scene. They understood that this was not just an animal, but a living creature whose life now depended on their brave and decisive actions. Grabbing ropes and boats, they rushed toward the shore, their hands trembling but their resolve unshakable. The whale's breathing grew heavier and more erratic with every passing second, and every moment seemed to threaten its life. The fishermen knew that if they did nothing right now, this magnificent creature would never return to the depths of the sea. The waves grew wilder and more unpredictable, but nothing could stop their determination. This moment would be forever remembered in the history of Cape Cod, a moment when human compassion stood against fear, storm, and the raw power of nature. It was the moment these young men decided to save the whale, no matter the personal risk. The young fishermen wasted no time. Grabbing heavy ropes and wooden planks, they approached the stranded whale, each step sinking slightly into the wet sand. The whale, sensing their movements, thrashed violently, sending sprays of salty water across the shore. Every wave that hit the beach seemed to push it deeper into the sand, making their task even more daunting. Fear mingled with determination as they strategized. "We need to work together," one of the fishermen shouted over the roaring wind, "or it won't make it." They began by tying the ropes around the whale's massive tail and fins, but the sheer size and weight of the creature made every move a struggle. The whale groaned and thrashed, its powerful body shifting unpredictably. A careless wave could wash one of the men into the icy water at any moment. Hours passed, and fatigue set in. Muscles burned, clothes soaked with seawater, and their hands raw from the rough ropes. Yet, they did not relent. Each fisherman took turns pushing, pulling, and shouting encouragement. Slowly, inch by inch, the whale began to move. A small cheer erupted each time it shifted slightly toward the water. The villagers watched anxiously from the distance, some praying, others offering words of encouragement. Children hid behind their parents, eyes wide with awe at the gigantic creature fighting for its life. The storm did not ease, waves continued to crash and winds howled, as if testing the determination of these young men. Amidst the chaos, a moment of sheer panic struck. The whale's fluke slapped violently against the sand, sending a young fisherman tumbling backward. His friends rushed to help him up, but the whale's thrashing seemed endless. "Keep calm. Follow my lead," shouted one of the elders guiding them. It was a test of courage, teamwork, and willpower. Gradually, as the tide began to rise, the situation slightly favored the rescuers. Water crept closer to the whale's body, lifting its massive weight just enough to make the pushing and pulling slightly easier. Each wave brought both hope and fear. One wrong move could send the whale crashing into the sand again. The men adjusted the ropes, coordinated their efforts, and with every heave, inch by inch, the whale edged toward the ocean. The struggle was far from over. Every second felt like an eternity. The whale, exhausted and disoriented, still fought against the efforts, thrashing with all its remaining strength. But the young fishermen refused to give up. They had made a silent promise to the stranded giant: it would return to its rightful home, no matter what. Hours turned into a day, and the first signs of exhaustion showed in every face. Yet, amid fatigue and uncertainty, a bond formed between the men and the creature, a silent understanding that life depended on human courage and compassion. The whale, sensing the persistence and care, slowed its thrashing, as if acknowledging that these humans were not enemies but allies. This was not merely a rescue, it was a battle between nature's raw power and human resolve. Every inch gained in the shifting sand felt like a monumental victory. Each drop of sweat, each strained muscle, was a testament to their unwavering determination. And as the tide continued to rise, the young men prepared themselves for the final push that would determine whether the whale would survive or succumb to the relentless shore. The sun had begun to dip toward the horizon, casting a dim, stormy light over Cape Cod's turbulent beach. The whale, though still alive, was exhausted beyond measure. Each breath came as a shuddering gasp, its massive body trembling against the sand. The tide had risen just enough to lift part of its weight, but it wasn't enough to free the giant from the trap of the shore. Every wave seemed to taunt the rescuers, one moment helping the whale, the next threatening to slam it back onto the sand. The fishermen, drenched and weary, could barely feel their hands through the raw rope burns, yet they refused to surrender. "We've come this far. Don't stop now," one of the young men shouted, his voice barely audible over the roaring wind and crashing waves. They coordinated each pull, each heave, timing their movements with the rhythm of the sea, knowing that even a second of miscalculation could doom the whale. Then, a terrifying moment struck. The whale, sensing the nearing water, thrashed violently, sending a young fisherman tumbling into the surf. His friends lunged forward, grabbing him just before the cold ocean tried to drag him away. Fear gripped everyone, but it also sharpened their focus. They knew they were dancing on the edge of disaster, yet quitting was never an option. Amid the chaos, a fragile hope began to glimmer. The whale's struggles gradually slowed, as if it understood that these humans were allies. Every inch gained toward the ocean was a victory, and the fishermen cheered in short bursts, careful not to startle the exhausted creature. Parents and children watching from the dunes erupted in quiet, anxious applause, their eyes wet with awe at the courage displayed on the shore. Time became irrelevant. The relentless storm, the pounding waves, the biting wind, all faded against the singular purpose of saving the whale. The young men dug their heels into the wet sand, pulling with all the strength left in their bodies, coordinating with shouts and hand signals. Inch by inch, the massive creature shifted closer to freedom. Then came the final challenge. A particularly large wave rolled in, threatening to push the whale back into the sand. The fishermen braced themselves, calling on every ounce of energy left in their exhausted bodies. "Now! Pull together," shouted one elder, his voice cutting through the chaos. In perfect unison, they heaved with a force born of desperation, courage, and compassion. The whale responded. Slowly, impossibly, it began to slide over the wet sand, lifted by the tide and guided by human determination. Water splashed over its back, glittering like liquid silver in the fading light. Each movement was a delicate balance of strength and care, for one wrong tug could endanger both the whale and the rescuers. Hours of struggle, sweat, and relentless determination had brought them to this moment. The whale, sensing its chance at freedom, gave one final, massive thrash, then lay still, floating partially in the shallow water. The fishermen held their ropes tightly, ready for any sudden movement, hearts pounding. And then, slowly but surely, the tide lifted the giant entirely, and the whale began to move toward the deep, open ocean. Relief washed over the rescuers. Exhausted, soaked, and bruised, they watched as the massive creature glided back into its natural home. The sea seemed to calm around it, the storm momentarily quieted, as if nature itself was acknowledging their heroic effort. It was a moment suspended between triumph and exhaustion, between danger and hope. This was more than a rescue. It was a testament to courage, teamwork, and the bond between humans and creatures of the wild. Every ache, every scrape, every moment of fear had been worth it. And as the whale disappeared into the horizon, the people of Cape Cod understood that this encounter would be remembered for generations, a story of hope, resilience, and compassion in the face of overwhelming odds. The final moments were nothing short of miraculous. As the tide continued to rise, the whale, exhausted but alive, began to glide toward the deeper waters. Every pull of the rope, every heave by the fisherman, had led to this moment, a moment where human courage met the raw majesty of nature. The storm, which had raged so violently all day, seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath to witness the triumph of compassion. The young fishermen, faces smeared with salt water and fatigue, leaned into the ropes one last time. Their muscles screamed with exhaustion, yet they refused to release their grip. Inch by inch, foot by foot, the massive creature moved closer to freedom. The whale's eyes, once full of panic and desperation, now reflected a cautious awareness, a silent acknowledgement of the humans who had fought to save it. On the dunes above, villagers erupted in relief and joy. Parents lifted their children high to see the spectacle, and the air was filled with cheers and tears of happiness. The storm's fury began to fade, and the first glimmers of sunset reflected on the water's surface, casting a golden glow over the scene. It was a moment that seemed suspended in time, a perfect harmony of nature and humanity. The whale gave one final, massive thrash, then paused, floating effortlessly in the shallows. The fishermen let out collective gasps and a shout of triumph escaped their lips. Slowly, it began to glide further, guided by the rising tide and the unwavering hands of its rescuers. Every splash, every wave, every movement was a step closer to life regained, freedom reclaimed. Finally, the whale surged into the deeper ocean, its colossal form cutting through the waves with renewed strength. A massive splash marked its departure, sending sprays of seawater glinting like diamonds in the fading light. The fishermen collapsed onto the sand, soaked, battered, but victorious. Exhaustion was replaced with a profound sense of accomplishment. They had faced danger, defied the storm, and given life to a creature that would otherwise have perished. Parents and children ran down to the shore, hugging the fishermen, their voices filled with awe and admiration. The story of the whale's rescue would be told and retold in Cape Cod for generations. Every scar on the fishermen's hands, every ache in their muscles, was a badge of honor, a testament to the bravery, patience, and compassion required to confront nature's raw power. But the most poignant moment was perhaps the whale itself. As it disappeared into the horizon, its massive tail slapping the water one final time, it seemed to offer a silent farewell. The creature had survived, not just because of its own strength, but because of the courage, intelligence, and empathy of humans who refused to turn away. The bond formed in those hours, between whale and fisherman, was unspoken but indelible. This event became more than a tale of rescue, it became a symbol of hope. In a world where fear often dictates action, the young men had chosen courage and compassion. They reminded everyone that life, human or animal, is interconnected, that bravery is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it, and that even the smallest acts of kindness can echo through generations. As the storm clouds finally parted, revealing the clear night sky above Cape Cod, the villagers looked out over the ocean, hearts full. The whale was gone, but the story would live forever. A story of resilience, empathy, and the extraordinary lengths humans can go to protect life. Every retelling of that day would inspire courage in others, reminding them that sometimes, the greatest victories are not over enemies, but over fear itself. And so, the tale of the whale of Cape Cod ended, not with tragedy, but with triumph, not with despair, but with hope. A giant of the ocean had been saved by giants of the human spirit, and the memory of that day would echo along the shores for centuries to come.